Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. I'm pleased to welcome Raghu Raghuram to the broadcast. Raghu is the Chief Executive Officer of VMware, a cloud computing and virtualization company that earns nearly $12 billion in annual revenue. Raghu took his current post in mid-2021, but he's been with the company for nearly 2 decades. I look forward to getting his thoughts on the future of cloud technology, the future of cybersecurity preparedness, and his recommendation for technology executives, the impacts of the pandemic on his business and his perspectives on how it's impacted his customers' businesses as well, and a lot more. Raghu, welcome to the broadcast. It's great to speak with you today.
Great to be here, Peter.
Wonderful. Well, Raghu, when you took over as a chief executive officer in mid-2021, you'd already been with the company for nearly 2 decades. Yeah. And I'm curious, in a transition like that, to what extent was your initial strategy one of continuity versus one of reinvention? You'd been part of the administration, you were driving plans of your own creation, and now you simply had a bigger chair that you were occupying. Talk a bit about the transition, if you would.
Yes, all those things where Pat had the tiebreaker vote and I had the other side. I said, Pat's no longer here, let's go. No, to be more serious, I think you're right. I mean, the seeds of the strategy were things that we had laid out actually for the last couple of years. However, we are being very balanced. 2 things I would say happened, regardless of me. All strategy has to be based on 2 things, right? One is what's the customers in the markets are telling you. And then the second is what are the core capabilities of your team and the readiness of your products to go in any given direction. Thanks to the pandemic, thanks to other factors, customers were accelerating their modernization journey, accelerating their move to the cloud, accelerating, trying to blur the boundary between physical and virtual. And there was an increasing role of government in dictating where their enterprise organizations put their data, which clouds they use, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a set of macro factors that were accelerating the trend that customers were going to use multiple clouds. They were going to be modernizing their applications and putting them in all sorts of distributed locations. They were going to build out the edge. So there's one set of market factors that was accelerating. And then the other set of factors that was accelerating was the readiness of our products to move in these new directions. So when I was appointed the CEO, these were the 2 factors that prompted me to say, look, we're going to go accelerate the things that we had started, but we're doing in a more balanced fashion. So previously, we were a lot more balanced about, okay, we're going to do some on-prem, some cloud, et cetera. Now, since June, I'd certainly try to move the dial to the right, if you will, right? So that's how I would explain it. And then the second also is, as you well know from your own work, if you want large organizations to move at a greater speed, you got to simplify, right? And you got to simplify and align. And this also helped with that. So that's the change, I would say, and that's the rationale for the change.
Really helpful. Thank you, Raghu. And I know in your prior role as COO of products and cloud services, you'd guided the company in transforming its applications into cloud services, part of what you're describing, in fact. Yeah. And in some ways, the transformation you were leading there's an analogy to the transformation that your customers need to undertake in terms of that simplification, the broader embrace of the cloud, perhaps even multi-cloud strategies, as you point out. Talk a bit about some of your own lessons in doing some of this work for VMware and how that translated to customers in the need for a comparable journey of their own.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. When I talk to customers, I in fact address that very point because they all ask the same thing. And the reality is, as with any other any transformation, it's not about the technology at the end of the day. It's about the people and the practices and the culture, right? And so that's where we had to do the bulk of the change. I mean, we've been doing for the last couple of years, and we are now accelerating. The way it takes for a company that was traditionally doing enterprise software to do SaaS that's a significant change. And then secondly, when you change the business model, it is not just about paying the salespeople a different way or saying instead of selling this product, sell this cloud service. it's a fundamental change across all practices in your company, right? Who you hire, the operations capabilities, the data capabilities, of course, the compensation capabilities, et cetera, right? So all of those things change. When you're trying to become a digital company, right, it's no longer a discrete set of stages. You build a product, you market the product, you sell the product, you service the product. Internally, we have this infinity loop. So everything going from building the product to having customers try it, to having customers use a little of it and then use a lot of it, and then come back and give you data on how they're using it. And of course, when they need support, et cetera, et cetera. So the actual business model of a company, certainly a software company, fundamentally changes. And that change is a cultural change. It's a change in business practices, literally speaking, right? It's also a change where you can't just say throw out everything that is the old and bring everything that's new, because we have customers that want both sides of it. So it's how you navigate that is another one. So these are the areas that my customers resonate with when I talk to them, right? Because all of them are in a similar boat. They're going from a purely physical world of doing business to a digital world of doing business, right? They're increasingly trying to become software companies, if you will, right? Mark Andreessen talked about it 10 years ago, but that's a sea change that's still going through, right? And so they can't throw out the old, they got to build the new, they got to make these things work together. And they all are trying to figure out what does it mean to be a product organization all of a sudden, right? So those things completely resonate for our customers.
Very, very interesting, Raghu. And you've talked about the need to redefine the category. That's a quote of yours, as a means of ensuring you don't end up on the wrong side of Clayton Christensen's innovator's dilemma. Yeah. You're talking about some of the transformation that's necessary, but I wonder if you could peel back the onion a little bit further into the key principles of redefining the category.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, it's the key principles are the same principles that would apply in many different industries, right? Really, it is looking at what our customers are doing, looking at that trend lines, right? And understanding the business drivers behind it, and assigning a value and a class of terminology almost to begin with, right? To describe what it is that customers want. And it has to be relevant to the organizations that we serve in their terms, right? And that's what we spent a lot of time thinking about, which is what are the trend lines within the customers that we serve, and how would we characterize that, and how would we describe that in a way that is business relevant to our customers, but is also reflective of the deep underlying technology shifts that are happening. And so that's a big part of what we studied. And then the second big part of that is to really understand how is that fundamentally different from a technology and a product and a cloud service point of view, with what already exists in the industry, right? From us or from somebody else. And if those three factors get satisfied, then you have the creation of a new category. And so that's what happened here, right? The category name that we came up with, multi-cloud computing, is, some would say it's not exotic, or sounds, in some ways, people might say it's boring, which in my opinion is a good thing, because you want people to relate to it. Second is, no category term is accurate. It does not, for example, reflect the change that's happening on the edge, because the true phenomenon that's happening is computing is becoming distributed. And if we talk about distributed computing, it sounds too geeky, right? But that's really is happening. Computing is becoming distributed and ubiquitous, and there needs to be consistent software platforms that enable enterprise organizations to, as they become digital organizations, to build applications that run everywhere, right? And then, of course, manage them and control them, and so on and so forth. So it's really about that led us to think about a new category.
I appreciate that overview. And now that VMware is an independent company, I wonder what technology segments you contemplating targeting in terms of partnerships and the broader ecosystem that you're curating as well, Raghu. To talk a bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always been fairly independent in our day-to-day operations, even though we were a controlled entity under Dell. Now that the corporate relationship has changed, on a day-to-day basis, things have not dramatically changed. I mean, you ask an average engineer or an average salesperson. The salesperson probably still works very closely with their Dell counterpart as well as with others, right? And the engineer is still building products in a fairly industry neutral way. But what has happened is the rest of the ecosystem and partners that previously were hesitant to work deeply with us are now saying, look, this is a standalone company. Yes, they have Dell as one of their partners and Dell as a competitor, but we can also equally take advantage of VMware capabilities if we work closely with VMware in order to advance our own what our customers want to do and what we want to do as a company. So that's really what we have seen. So it's not as much about entering a new category of business, right? That might well be facilitated down the road, but certainly not immediately. The immediate benefit is it allows us to engage in a deeper conversation with partners that previously were fairly superficially working with us, and now they want to do much more with us.
You've talked about this multi-cloud strategy, multi-cloud computing as the area of focus, and the strategy of hybrid clouds. So different organizations choose different pathways, whether private, public, or hybrid. Talk a little bit about some of what you see as the key differentiating factors as to the approach a company might take. How do you advise the many companies that you're in regular touch with as to the form that might take within their own environments?
Yeah, so fundamentally, we use a term that we call cloud smart, right? What's happened is in the last decade, some great cloud companies have emerged, right, with significant innovation and R&D capability and capital spending, et cetera. And they all do certain things better than their counterparts in certain ways, right? And each of them has their own strengths. So if you're a CIO, you would be shortchanging yourself by not taking advantage of all of these things. So that's point number one. Point number two, there is not enough time or talent in their companies or in the industry to redo everything that they have done, right? Nor is that a business case to do that. So for many, many CIOs, what they are realizing is there is a certain class of applications that are best run in their existing data centers because it is close enough to some data source that they don't want to move or be just cost prohibitive, or because of regulations, they prefer to leave it there. Or for certain class of applications, their IT teams can operate it much more cheaply, right? Because a customer's application portfolio is not a uniform portfolio. And so they have a bunch of applications that they're going to run in their private data centers. Same time, they are rethinking the physical digital boundary, right? They're rethinking their manufacturing shop floor. They're rethinking their retail stores. They're rethinking their logistics centers, et cetera, et cetera. And they're putting a lot more computing there and new applications there because they want robotics or whatever it is they want, right? And there are a lot of new applications they want to build to serve their consumers at scale, which they want to build in the cloud or use the AI capabilities in the cloud. So this is this distributed environment that companies are undergoing. And so hybrid was the first set of terminology, and hybrid actually, in many ways, turns out to be a simplistic definition because that says the customer has some applications on-premise, some applications in one cloud, and that's how they're going to operate. In reality, 75% of our customers, speaking about our customers, are using 2 public clouds or more. 40% are using 3 or more. They all think that the edge is going to house 10, 20% of their applications in the future, right? So the picture is going to be more complex, which is why we evolved from just saying hybrid to saying multi-cloud. Multi-cloud is the superset. And the core rationale for that is being cloud smart. Figure out where you want to run a certain application or a business process, where it is best suited, and then build around it as opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to use this or that. So
one of the things you mentioned earlier is the necessity to strive towards simplification. That's an important aspect of or important tenet for IT leaders to orient themselves with. Distributed computing is in many ways adds complexity. It also adds to the threat landscape beyond that. I know that as cyber incidents continue to increase, I know that this is a topic that is near and dear to you, not only, of course, in managing your own company, but also in providing advice and providing products for your clients as well. Talk a bit about some of your perspectives there in terms of the evolution of cybersecurity and some of the practices that you believe to be important in light of some of the changes that you're describing.
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. I mean, what we are embarking on in a world where applications need to live everywhere is a world of a lot more complexity. And in many ways, that is the problem that we are trying to solve for our customers, right? Historically, the reason people have brought VMware into their data centers is because we help them manage the complex heterogeneous landscape they're facing, or with all of their iOS devices and Android devices and various end user devices. And that applies to security as well, right? If you're going to be a digital company, then what it means is that most of your important assets and business practices are done in a digital world. Therefore, cyber security is, in fact, more important than physical security in many places. And so that's point number one. And point number two is when you're digital, you can literally be attacked around the world, or the attacker can be from anywhere in the world. So, and super sophisticated. So it can be nation states, it can be people that are out to collect ransoms. This can be classic attacks, if you will. Can be any number, right? So the number of threat vectors also increases, even as the importance of your digital assets to your corporation increases. As a result, it's no surprise that cyber spending continues to outpace everything, even digital innovation, right? And so we have taken an approach that you fundamentally cannot continue to put security on top of the platforms and the applications that you build. You got to build it into the platforms and the applications that you build, right? And the simple analogy that I use is imagine if you had to you bought a car and then you got to shop for yourself by yourself for airbags and anti-lock brakes and all of those safety systems, and then you go and bolt onto it. It is never going to be well done, right? So what we try to do is, in this multi-cloud world, build security into the platforms that customers use. And that's the approach that we are taking. And we are investing pretty significantly in that. And so we are not a pure play cyber company, but security is one of the core areas which will be multi-cloud. To your point, customers do not have, again, the time or talent to say, I've got one way of doing security on AWS, another way to do Azure, another one on-prem, another one on the edge, another one on the end users. They want to bring it all together and they want to simplify it, right? And so that's what we are trying to do.
Interesting. You alluded earlier to the accelerant that the pandemic has been towards transformation, that many organizations pulled forward a lot of aspects of their roadmap and were able to actually achieve a clock speed, an ability to deliver at rates that they perhaps hadn't thought were possible, simply by removing, in some cases, I'm speaking generally, but the ephemera that builds up in some ways during less trying times. If anything, a crisis adds focus for the entire team and a focus on those things that are most important. I wonder now, as somebody who took your post in the throes of the pandemic, in addition now, of course, to counseling many others who are leading their way through this. What have you seen as some of the most profound impacts and maybe some of the difference makers for those organizations that have been most resilient during these times, all things being equal?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the pandemic has been terrible in so many dimensions, right? But one area where I think it's opened people's eyes is to newer ways of doing things and accelerating the pace of progress, right? I think it was Satya Nadella that said the pandemic took 20 years of enterprise IT progress and compressed it down to 2 years, right? So I think that statement largely has been playing out. The natural constraints to innovation have been removed. And the companies that have done well have been the companies that have been willing to rethink their what they've been willing to accept by way of their internal or external processes, partly due to the pandemic, but partly due to thinking, okay, it gives them a reason to think, okay, why don't we think about this in a fundamentally new way, right? It's removed all the mental inhibitors to what is possible and what's not possible. And so I would say that's one. And the clearest signs of that is in the accelerating pace of digital change, accelerating adoption of cloud, accelerating adoption of technologies that blend the boundary between physical and digital, right? Like, I don't know, cashierless stores or store pickup while you order on your phone or on the web or whatever it is, right? Or telemedicine, you can name it, right? So I think that's one. But the other equally important thing is it has brought about the importance of resiliency, of digital resiliency, right? And companies have realized that this is the ultimate resiliency test. It's not about one piece of software going down or one piece of your infrastructure going down. It's the world literally changing before your eyes. And we have stories upon stories upon stories of customers that went from 99% in the office to 99% working from home and having to support remote employees and so on and so forth, right? And that opens up a new world. I don't think any of those things are going back to the old state. So what is going to be very interesting over the next several years is which of these habits that we adopt during the pandemic are we going to keep and keep forever? And there are going to be some that we're going to be a blend of what we used to do and what we are doing now, right? For example, I think customer engagement will always be hybrid. I mean, both the customers and companies will want to meet face to face, but there's a lot they will do via this sort of mechanisms, right? And there'll be some interesting blends of both. So I think it'll be those two things. I think going back to completely the old way, I think is going to be a very, very small fraction. So I think this is one of the irreversible changes that has happened in how we live and work.
I know that you are in the throes now of thinking about kind of the longer term strategy for the organization and its broader implications. We would be grateful if you could share a little bit about your vision as you look to the future.
Yeah. So about 18 months ago, we put out our 2030 agenda with respect to three factors: trust, equity, and sustainability, right? They're broadly in what the industry calls as ESG, enterprise social governance, right? And to our point earlier, this is one of the cases where how the world around us, what is important to the world around us, to our organizations, to our customers, to our stakeholders, investors, et cetera, and what's important to our employees. These three words are, let me explain. The trust, of course, refers to some of the topics we talked about: resiliency, cyber resiliency, other resiliency in other forms. Having suppliers like ourselves be trusted by the larger populations that we serve, right? Equity is about diversity, equity, and inclusion, helping span the digital divide, striving for a more equitable workplace. And sustainability, of course, is helping do what we can and must and should do to fight climate change through the use of technology as well as through the use of our business practices. The last one is especially noteworthy for VMware because our technology inherently is about reducing power consumption because we make computing equipment a lot more efficient, right? And therefore, we reduce power consumption. In fact, our sustainability team has calculated, and this is validated with external auditors and so on, that we have saved the planet 1.2 billion metric tons of carbon emission, right? And that's an enormous number, and that is without even trying. So you can imagine once we start trying what we can do. So this 2030 goals is very, very important to us as a company. And that is one of the few things that we have. I mean, in the tech business, it's really hard to predict what's right in front of your nose, let alone what's 10 years out. But in these three areas, we thought it was worthwhile to set ourselves a goal that's truly ambitious and work steadily towards it.
Raghu, as the CEO of VMware, you run a company of an extraordinarily large and complex organization. There are very few people who you're in a club that is rather exclusive. I wonder, as you look back, what have been some of the difference makers for you? What are some of the magic ingredients to your career and your makeup that have led to your achieving this august position? And perhaps with a little tuned, if you wouldn't mind tuning your answer a little bit to those who might wish to follow in your footsteps in one way or another. What have been some of the difference makers for you?
To be honest with you, I've not had time to sit down and digest all this, right? So these things come one upon the other very fast. But I think fundamentally, what the reason I've had success at VMware is I've taken a 360-degree view of the business right from the get-go, right? So I look at the world from the customer and the market trends and so on and so forth. And then I look at the world from a fairly deep, try to get a very, very deep understanding of technology, right? Customers can tell you what their problems are going to be in the next couple of years, but they're not going to tell you what disruptive technology will they adopt in 5 years from now, right? So you somehow have to bring those two things together. So I think that's something that I've always tried to spend a lot of time on both ends of the barbell, if you will, the customer end of the barbell and the technology not only from our team, but what's happening with other really, really disruptive thinkers and entrepreneurs in the technology space, I would say, right? So I think that's one of the things that has helped me. And I think the second thing that helps, especially in our business, is I come from a product management background. And in the product management background, there is a phrase that you got to be able to ride the elevator up and down. What that means is that you got to be able to be in the details. At the same time, you got to be able to step up and look at the forest, not just the trees, right? Our business is a business around details. And so you got to be really, really incredibly focused on the details, even while you're looking at the job, right? And thirdly, like anything else, it's a people business, right? And so being able to engage in a fundamentally authentic manner with the folks around you is also a very, very critical thing to help you get the best data, help you build the best relationships, and help you figure out how you want to lead. So I think you put me on a spot a little bit, but speaking from, and then of course, like what we started out with, which is you got to be able to clarify things for people, and you got to simplify things for people, right? And you got to be able to say, okay, I can bring some energy and positivity into a certain direction. If you're able to do some of these things, I think it works in your favor.
Raghu Raghuram, thank you so much for joining me today on Technovation and sharing a bit about your experiences now 6 months into your post, roughly at VMware, and sharing a bit about what you see as the future of the company and its broader impact in the tech landscape. It's been a great conversation.
Great, and thanks for the time and the questions.